And as promised, it is Wednesday, and that means Wednesdays with Wes is here, the pride of Indianapolis, IU alum, and he won't be hearing it because he'll be there in person, but come 3:30 Eastern on Saturday, ba ba da da ba da da ba ba da da ba da da, Indiana, Oregon, top 10 matchup, CBS. Who needs the SEC, right, Wes? When we've got a top 10 matchup at Autzen Stadium, Oregon, number 3, Indiana, number 7. Certainly not the biggest game in school history. I think that still goes to the game they played in the college football playoff a year ago. But college game day, yet again, will be at an Indiana game. And as we have learned, it was no fluke. 2024, Indiana is back, and I think they're better this year. You are headed out to Autzen on Saturday, so give us the travel plans as you head out to Oregon, Indiana, and it's got to be interesting, right? I imagine, Wes, when you thought about Oregon joining the Big Ten and you living in Vegas and UCLA and USC, all right, we'll go to these games, but it'll probably be like, yay, we're happy to be here, get our ass kicked. Now you're going out, and it's the biggest game of the week. It's Indiana, it's Oregon, it's a top 10 matchup.
Yeah, we're going to get a rainy Saturday in Eugene, but hopefully it won't rain on the Hoosiers parade from at least a fandom perspective. You mentioned game day being there. Tim, we always talk about, okay, what selections are going to be on Scott Van Pelt's winners on Thursday. I can tell you we could put probably an odds-on money that the only person to pick Indiana on that college game day panel will be Pat McAfee. he will stick because he knows where he sleeps, and that is with a spouse that is an IU graduate, so he knows where that is going. So he will be the lone wolf that picks Indiana because the ESPN panel has not loved the Hoosiers. It was like they were that feel-good story, and then all of a sudden, man, they're getting a little too close to upsetting the cartel. Yeah, we got to knock them down a peg. So we'll see if Oregon is able to do that. But the market certainly believes in Indiana more than I think a lot of the national media does. We have seen it. Yeah, because we talked about that with the Illinois game a couple weeks ago, and we're like, we know that the average Joe is going to be betting Illinois because they were the hot team over the summer, right? And in Indiana, I was like, okay, they're a one-hit wonder, one-year wonder. And then all of a sudden, you kept seeing the line move to Indiana, and it went up from like 3 to like 6, 6.5. And it proved to be pretty sharp money as they won 63-10. So they came back the next week and bet them against Iowa. Well, then that got from like 6, 6.5 to 8.5. And that was probably a bridge too far. That's a tough place to win. But I think that was a good big win for Indiana because those are games that they haven't proven that they can win. Those physical, low-scoring games, and it's like, okay, is this a little bit too much for Indiana? And then Mendoza hit Surratt, and that was all she wrote late in the fourth quarter. So now the market's coming back with Indiana, whereas the media, most of the media pundits are going to be like, okay, Oregon's going to smoke him. But the market doesn't seem to think so. Because this opened 10.5, and it's dropped like a stone, and I think it's finally gotten some resistance at the 7.5 mark, where it's pretty much been the last 2 days.
Yeah, we'll have Brett Ciancia later here in the podcast, as we always do on Wednesdays, and I was telling you, if you have his breakdown over at Pick Six Previews, his Pick Six Plus, I was telling you, there's a lot of green, and you're like, oh, Oregon? I'm like, no. Both these teams are in the green. Everywhere you look, statistically, they both have been dominant. And even the adjusted to opponent numbers for Indiana, if you look over at Pick Six Previews, among Power 4 teams, Indiana adjusted offense, number 5 in the country, adjusted rush offense, 4th, number 1 in adjusted passing offense. Defense maybe not as strong, but still pass defense is 2nd in the nation, according to Brett's adjusted opponent numbers. And obviously Oregon has been very impressive as well. Looking back to last year, Wes, the Notre Dame college football playoff game closed 7. Notre Dame won that game 27-17, couple of late touchdowns from Indiana. And then you go back to the Ohio State game, that game closed 10.5, 38-15 as the score. And I was talking to Matt Humans about it last night on Primetime, and he brought up a fair point. Look, Indiana has been a favorite in every game outside of those two in this weekend under Cignetti. 12-4 ATS as a favorite, 0-2 ATS and straight up as an underdog. But it is worth noting, Wes, the two teams they played last year played each other
Right.
in the national championship game. So I want you to compare last year's team to this year's team, because I have said without a doubt that this year's team is better than last year's team. And it's not to besmirch last year's team. I just think this team is better. I think Fernando Mendoza is better than Rourke. I think the skill position players are maybe a little bit better as well. How would you compare 25 versus 24 from an Indiana standpoint?
Last year probably had a little bit more roster continuity simply because it happened so fast, where Cignetti took the majority of his staff from James Madison. They had 13 just from that program alone, and that was a double-digit win team, so they were used to winning and playing with each other and, wanted to go play in the Power Four and play Big Ten football. So you had maybe more roster continuity from excuse me, I think the portal standpoint, but now they're starting to get, a little bit better. I mean, it's not like, okay, they went to the playoff, now you're getting a bunch of 5-star guys, but you're starting to get, I think, a little bit better talent, and certainly are more athletic, especially on the positions where they've really struggled in years past. And down programs tend to struggle on the offensive and the defensive lines and in the secondary. And Indiana, I think, at the top level in terms of their starters, have been very good and as good as anybody in the conference. Now, the one knock on Indiana, and this is because it takes several years to be able to do this when you've got a new coach and a new regime, is to build that depth at those positions. And this is where, if something goes wrong, this is where it could potentially show of not having that depth, because these powerhouses like Oregon and the like, they have that depth. Where, okay, a guy goes down, we got a number 2 or a number 3 third unit guy that can take over. So I think in terms of this team being a little bit different, it's not been like all the James Madison guys necessarily. It's been other guys that have been able to step up. One of the big stories with Indiana is that Mikhail Kamara, the All-American last year, doesn't have a sack yet because he's getting double teamed. He was, of course, one of Sig's guys that transferred from James Madison. But it's these young guys that are stepping up on the defensive line that are making plays. And that's what you saw against Illinois in that beatdown a couple weeks ago. So I think, and there's also a confidence, I think, with this team that, hey, we got a squared away operation, and there's a belief in that locker room. And there's a belief in their building and in their facilities that they can play with anybody. And I think Curt Cignetti's confidence has really, and bravado has rubbed off on these guys, where they're about business. You've got grown-ups, I think, on that team now, and they certainly play like it.
You look at the quarterbacks in this game, Wes, and both of these guys are top 5 in Heisman odds. Dante Moore is your betting favorite at 5-1. Fernando Mendoza at around 14-15-1 right now. He was the favorite going into the Iowa game. That was before Dante Moore had his performance against Penn State, before Ty Simpson had the back-to-back wins for Alabama. But both of these quarterbacks have been almost flawless this year. You look at Dante Moore, 74% completion percentage, 14 touchdowns, 1 pick, can use his legs if needed. We saw that in the Penn State game on that 4th and 1, getting that 1 yard in overtime. And then Mendoza, not necessarily on point against Iowa, but still made the big throw late. If that game tied up, and they pull away there. So you look at a combined 30 touchdown passes to 2 interceptions for these two quarterbacks, both completing over 73% of passes. I know you're biased. You're wearing your IU shirt here today, but which quarterback do you trust more? Because it's funny, I asked this question to Humans on Tuesday night, and he immediately said Fernando Mendoza. And I think a big reason why, Wes, is because he watched Dante Moore at UCLA. He's a completely different quarterback, and I think things have changed for him since he's gotten to Oregon. But I think it's a fair question to ask who's got the better quarterback on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I think from a passing standpoint, it's Mendoza, and keep in mind too with Fernando Mendoza when he was at Cal and he was getting sacked like 50 plus times. He's behind a much better offensive line, and you mentioned the Iowa game where the numbers weren't great because he was getting blitzed a lot, so he was getting hit. He got hit on that big touchdown pass late
Mm-hmm.
and just threw a rope there to Surratt. So both of these quarterbacks have been able to throw the ball really well. Just when you look at the different metrics, the EPA, expected points added, EPA per dropback, Indiana second, Oregon sixth. So all these numbers are relatively even, and they actually probably favor Indiana a little bit from the defensive standpoint in terms of the pass defense. And then they get D'Angelo Pons back in the secondary, so that's going to be key. But what worries me a little bit about Moore is the running game. And that, because we know Oregon can run the ball and they can actually stop the run. That's where I was really wrong on this team, I think, coming into the season. I thought, well, they're good off the edge, but I don't know how good they are in the interior. And Penn State didn't get a lot in that running game against them. So Indiana, I don't know how much they're going to be able to run with in the tackles. I want to see Mendoza run a little bit more when he can, because I think he can run, and maybe they have some design runs where they haven't really shown a lot of that. So Oregon certainly has to be ready for that and use that speed against the Ducks defensive line. So I would trust Mendoza, I guess, a little bit more from a passing standpoint, but Dante Moore with his athleticism, and he can break a run, and that's going to worry Indiana because they have to be focused. Because if you go back to that Old Dominion game, and by the way, that Old Dominion win is like getting better and better all the time for Indiana. So Old Dominion, first play from scrimmage, quarterback draw 75 yards for a touchdown on the first play of scrimmage, and broke a couple big runs in that game. So Indiana's got to be ready for that, and they're going to have to spy this guy or he's going to make you pay.
Yeah, it's always tricky to play running props for quarterbacks. I did give out one a couple weeks ago with Taylor Green, and he got sacked a couple times late in that game, but he thankfully had enough yards to surpass it. But you always got to worry about playing running props for quarterbacks in college football because of the sack numbers, and Fernando Mendoza taking a 40-yard loss to fall into the end zone against Iowa. So I can't wait for this game. I'm fired up for it, Wes. You're going to be there, and it should be an amazing atmosphere. So you've got 7.5 in pocket. How does Indiana win on?
Got to be able to run the ball, and you're probably not going to get a ton, you wouldn't think, between the tackles, even though I think this Indiana offensive line has been very much improved. You're going to have to get to the perimeter with Roman Hemby, the Maryland transfer, Mendoza, maybe some end arounds to Surratt or to Omar Cooper. They did lose Lee Beebe, the UAB transfer, to injury, but I think Indiana's got enough depth at running back where they can overcome that loss that they had a couple weeks ago. But they're going to have to run the ball, and they're going to have to be at least somewhat stout against the run. And the linebackers, like the big time players, the Camaras and the Aiden Fishers, the main linebacker from Indiana, transferred from James Madison, where he said, "This is why I came here to play in games like this." Well, you got to be like an All-American here. This is where you get All-American status or All Big Ten status, are games like this. And you've got to make those tackles, because the linebackers are going to have to be huge, because Oregon, the line is going to give them holes. But you have to be able to fill and not miss tackles, and then all of a sudden, these 2 and 3 yard gains become 7 and 8 yard gains. And that was Indiana's problem offensively against the better teams they played last year, like Ohio State and Notre Dame. Way too many 2nd and 9s, way too many 3rd and 8s, and you got behind the chains, and all of a sudden you're getting a lot of 3 and outs. So that's where Indiana, they're going to have to, kind of nickel dime them a little bit. See if you can get off the edge or off tackle and get 4 or 5 yards of carry, so you're in 2nd or 3rd and medium instead of 3rd and long.